At 4 o'clock in the morning, on June 27, 1995, a phone rang in a small apartment in Mason City, Iowa. The woman who answered it was groggy, half asleep. She told her producer the same thing any of us might say after sleeping through an alarm: "I'm up, I'm coming." She never came. 20 minutes later, her car was found exactly where she'd parked it the night before, untouched by anyone driving it away, but scattered around it, a bent key, a pair of red heels, earrings ripped loose, a hairdryer she'd apparently still been holding. Her name was Jodi Huisentruit. She was 27 years old. She was a rising television news anchor with a bright, easy on-camera presence that viewers in northern Iowa woke up to every single morning. And in the time it took her to walk roughly the length of a school bus, from her apartment door to her car, she disappeared off the face of the earth. No body, no confession, no trial. 30 years, 2 federal grand juries, at least 4 named persons of interest, and one $100,000 reward later, nobody has ever been charged. This is the story of what happened to Jodi Huisentruit, and the 4 men investigators have circled back to, again and again, without ever being able to close the case. Before she was a case file, Jodi Huisentruit was, by every account, exactly the kind of person people build their mornings around. She was born June 5, 1968, in the small town of Long Prairie, Minnesota, the youngest daughter of Maurice and Imogene Huisentruit. Long before journalism, she was an athlete. She and her high school golf team won back-to-back Minnesota State Class A championships in 1985 and 1986. Friends from that era describe her as competitive but warm, the kind of teammate who made everyone around her better without making it about herself. She went on to study mass communications at St. Cloud State University, graduating in 1990, and immediately went to work, chasing the career she'd wanted since she was a kid: television news. She cut her teeth at small market stations in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Alexandria, Minnesota, the unglamorous, early-morning drive-your-own-camera gear stage every broadcaster has to survive. By 1993, she'd landed the job she'd been building toward: morning anchor at Kimped TV in Mason City, Iowa. It's a small station, but it mattered enormously in that market. Jodi became the face people saw over their coffee before work. Colleagues remembered her as driven, someone who talked openly about wanting to move up to a bigger market, maybe Minneapolis-St. Paul, and who was doing everything right to get there. She had no known enemies, no public conflicts, no reason on paper for anyone to want to hurt her, which is exactly what makes what happened next so difficult to explain. On the night of June 26th, into the early morning of June 27th, 1995, Jodi's routine looked almost identical to any other night. She'd spent part of the evening at the home of a close friend, John Vansice, more on him shortly, before heading home to her apartment on Key Apartments' parking lot on South Kentucky Avenue. She had a new car sitting in that lot, a red Mazda Miata she'd only recently purchased. At roughly 4 a.m., Kimped producer Amy Coons called Jodi's apartment to get her moving for the 6 a.m. broadcast. Jodi picked up. She sounded groggy but coherent. She told Amy she'd overslept and was on her way. That was the last confirmed contact anyone ever had with her. When 6 a.m. came and went with no Jodi, another anchor stepped in to cover the broadcast, and a colleague was sent to check on her apartment. What they found didn't make sense at first, and then it made a different kind of sense that was much worse. Jodi's car, the Miata she'd just bought, was still sitting in the lot. She had never made it inside it. Scattered on the pavement nearby, her red high heels, her earrings, a hairdryer she'd apparently been holding on to, mid-routine, when something interrupted her, and her car key, bent, not dropped, bent, in a way investigators say is consistent with a violent struggle at the exact moment she was trying to unlock the door. Investigators also recovered an unidentified partial palm print from a pole near her vehicle, a detail some early reporting mischaracterized as coming from the car itself, or as being bloody. both of which the Mason City Police Department has since clarified were inaccurate. What is confirmed is this: someone else's hand touched something at that scene, and to this day, that print has never been definitively matched to anyone. 3 separate neighbors later told police they'd heard screaming from the parking lot around the time Jodi would have been walking to her car. It was 4 a.m. Nobody went outside to check. By the time anyone did, there was nothing left to find but her belongings, scattered in a line leading away from where her car was parked, as if she'd been dragged. One more detail that stuck with investigators for 3 decades. A neighbor reported seeing a white Ford Econoline van idling in the parking lot around the same time, engine running, lights on. Nobody has ever been able to connect that van to a driver, a plate, or a person. By that afternoon, this was no longer a missing person case. The Mason City Police Department, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and the FBI were treating it as an abduction. In the days after Jodi vanished, this became a genuinely massive search. Search parties combed fields and ditches across northern Iowa. The FBI got involved almost immediately, given the likelihood of a violent abduction. Jodi's family, devastated and desperate, hired private investigators out of Minneapolis within months, who in turn brought in additional PI support from Omaha. And then, nothing. No ransom demand, no confession, no body, just silence, stretching from weeks into months into years. Over the following 3 decades, investigators say they interviewed literally hundreds of people. 2 separate federal grand juries were convened to examine evidence in the case, an extraordinary step for a missing person investigation, and a sign of just how seriously authorities have treated it, even without an arrest to show for it. In 2001, with no trace of Jodi ever found, a court declared her legally dead, a necessary legal step for her family, but one that changed nothing about the criminal investigation, which remained officially open. And here's what separates this case from 1,000 other cold cases. It never actually went cold, not really. Every few years, for 30 years, something has reignited it. A new tip, a new documentary, a leaked document, a new interview. Which brings us to one of the strangest chapters in the entire case. In early June 2008, a package arrived at the Mason City Globe-Gazette newspaper office. No return address. A postmark from Waterloo, Iowa. Inside were photocopies of 84 handwritten pages, Jodi's personal journal. Here's the part that should stop you cold. The original of that journal had been in law enforcement's possession since 1995. It was evidence. It wasn't supposed to be anywhere except a police file. Within days, the Mason City Police Department identified the sender, Cheryl Ellingson, wife of the department's former police chief, David Ellingson. In other words, someone connected to the very top of the original investigation had a copy of sealed evidence sitting at home for over a decade, and that copy ended up mailed anonymously to a newspaper. To date, authorities have never publicly explained why the former chief had a copy of that journal outside of evidence storage, or why his wife chose to send it to the press 13 years after the case began. No charges were filed over the incident. It remains one of the strangest, least explained footnotes in the entire investigation, and it's part of why some Iowa lawmakers, including a retiring state representative who sat on the Iowa House Public Safety Committee, have publicly used the word cover-up when describing how local officials handled aspects of this case. Whatever was or wasn't in that journal, one thing is certain. This case has never simply been about finding one obvious suspect. It's been about an investigation that has, at multiple points, turned inward on itself. Which brings us to the 4 men whose names keep surfacing, year after year, decade after decade. None of them ever charged, none of them ever cleared to the public's full satisfaction either. The last person confirmed to have seen Jodi before she disappeared was a man named John Vansice. Vansice was an older, close friend of Jodi's. By his own account and hers, they'd spent that final evening together at his home, watching old birthday videos the 2 of them had compiled. He was, by multiple accounts from people around the case, someone who may have had feelings for Jodi that went beyond friendship. feelings some investigators and case followers have speculated were not fully reciprocated. To be clear about what's actually on the record, Vansice cooperated with police early on. He voluntarily submitted fingerprints, palm prints, and a DNA sample. He took a polygraph test and passed it, according to reporting from the Sioux City Journal. For years, that seemed to settle the matter in the eyes of many, but the case never fully let him go. In March 2017, more than 2 decades after Jodi disappeared, the Mason City Police Department executed a search warrant seeking GPS location data from 2 vehicles registered to Vansice. That warrant, and the reasoning behind it, was sealed, and authorities never publicly explained what prompted it. The public didn't even learn the search had happened until it leaked to the press in 2018. That same year, the true crime series 48 Hours aired never-before-seen footage of Vansice as part of their coverage of the case. He maintained his innocence in every interview he ever gave, right up until his death in December 2024. Was John Vansice ever named a suspect by police? No. Was he ever charged with anything related to Jodi's disappearance? Also no. But he is, without question, the one person whose account of that final night has been scrutinized more than anyone else's for 30 years. And the sealed 2017 warrant means we still don't fully know what investigators were looking for, or what, if anything, they found. The second name that's followed this case for decades belongs to a man named Tony Dejuan Jackson, a convicted serial rapist who, at the time of Jodi's disappearance, lived only 2 blocks from her workplace. According to CBS News reporting on the case, a jailhouse informant later claimed Jackson made cryptic, unsettling remarks about Jodi's disappearance while incarcerated, comments that were unsettling enough to draw the attention of investigators and later, the producers of 48 Hours. But here's the important caveat, and it's a significant one. No physical evidence has ever linked Jackson to the crime scene, to Jodi, or to the parking lot where she vanished. Investigators ultimately ruled him out as a serious suspect. His name surfaces in nearly every retrospective on this case, not because the evidence points to him, but because of how unsettling those secondhand jailhouse comments were, a reminder of how many disturbing threads this investigation has had to run down and eliminate, one by one, over 30 years. Of everyone ever connected to this case, the most chilling name might be Christopher Revak. Revak lived in Mason City around the time Jodi disappeared. He surfaced as a person of interest early on, but, according to Mason City Police Lieutenant Frank Stearns, speaking to a local newspaper in 2009, investigators found no evidence connecting him to Jodi's case at that time. Here's why his name refuses to go away. In 2007, a woman named Renee Williams, a mother of 3, working a bartending shift at the Eagles Lodge in Ava, Missouri, closed up for the night and never made it home. Investigators later determined Revak had been at that bar the night she disappeared. Separately, in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, a woman named Dejuan Jackson vanished. Her remains were later found by hunters in a field. Revak became a person of interest in that case too, but died before he could be formally questioned. He took his own life in a Missouri jail cell in 2009 while awaiting trial for Renee Williams's murder. Years later, Wood County, Wisconsin authorities formally closed their investigation into Dejuan Jackson's death, naming Revak as responsible. So here is a man connected to at least 1 confirmed murder and believed responsible for a second, who also happened to live in the same city Jodi Huisentruit disappeared from. Douglas County, Missouri Sheriff Chris DeGase, who worked the Renee Williams case, has been publicly direct about his own theory. He believes Revak may be a serial offender with a pattern of victims fitting a similar profile, and that the geographic and timeline overlap with Jodi's case is not something he's comfortable calling a coincidence. But, and this matters, the Mason City Police Department has stated on the record that they have never found evidence connecting Revak to Jodi's disappearance specifically. His name remains in the file, not because of what's been proven, but because of what he's already been tied to elsewhere, and because he died before anyone could ask him directly. The newest name in this case didn't surface through police work. It surfaced through friendship and 30 years of one woman quietly wondering. Patty Niemeyer was Jodi's childhood best friend. In 2022, after watching a 2020 special on the case, Niemeyer began looking at an old, unreleased police sketch connected to the investigation, and she says she saw her own ex-husband's face in it. That ex-husband is Brad Millerbernd. According to the docuseries, her last broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, Niemeyer and Millerbernd finalized their divorce just 4 days before Jodi disappeared. Investigators reportedly noted that Millerbernd owned a white van at the time, matching, at least broadly, the description witnesses gave of the vehicle seen idling in Jodi's parking lot that morning. He also lived roughly 3 hours from Jodi's apartment, and by his own admission, had taken Jodi out once in the past. To be fair to Millerbernd, he has maintained his innocence throughout, has continued cooperating with investigators according to the documentary, and police have not publicly confirmed or denied the extent to which they've investigated him. When reporters reached out to him directly for comment, he did not respond. What makes this person of interest different from the others isn't stronger evidence. By any public measure, it's arguably thinner than what existed against Vansice or Revak. What makes it different is who came forward. Not a detective, not an anonymous tip line, but Jodi's own childhood best friend, who has said publicly that stepping forward against her own ex-husband, the father figure to people she loves, was one of the hardest things she's ever done. For most of 30 years, this case moved in decade-long increments. In the last 2 years, it has moved faster than at almost any point since 1995. In 2023, a friend of Jodi's began pushing for a new reward for information leading to the recovery of her remains. First $25,000, then doubled to $50,000. As of this recording, some reporting places an active reward as high as $100,000 through the 2026 anniversary of her disappearance. Then, in early October 2024, private investigator Steve Ridge reported a detail that had never previously been public. In the 10 days or so before she disappeared, Jodi had started seeing someone new. The two had reportedly been in near-daily contact since they began dating. Ridge's theory is that this new relationship may have triggered jealousy in someone else, someone who felt pushed out, and that this jealousy may be what escalated into violence. Weeks later, in mid-October 2024, following what's been described as an anonymous tip, the Mason City Police Department searched a wooded site in rural Winsted, Minnesota, a location roughly 170 miles from Mason City that was, at the time, slated for a future apartment complex. Then, on November 20th, 2025, police returned to that same area in Winsted. This time it wasn't a new tip. It was because a house on that property, previously inaccessible during the earlier search, had recently been demolished. With a K-9 unit assisting, investigators searched the newly cleared ground. Mason City Police Sergeant Terrence Prochaska released a statement afterward confirming the search had taken place, and confirming, directly, nothing of significance was located. This is an open investigation. Also in 2024, John Vansice, the man who spent Jodi's final evening with her, died, maintaining his innocence to the end. And in July 2025, ABC News Studios released her last broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, a 3-part documentary series on Hulu that dug into all 4 persons of interest we just walked through. Notably, the filmmakers say the series was also able to correct a long-standing factual error that had circulated in early reporting for decades, that the palm print evidence had come from Jodi's car and had been bloody. Investigators confirmed on record that the print came from a nearby pole and that there has never been a confirmed report of it being bloody. Even 30 years later, this case is still being corrected in real time. So where does that leave us? 4 persons of interest, 0 arrests, 0 charges, 1 partial palm print that's never been matched, 1 bent key that tells us, more clearly than almost any other piece of evidence in any cold case, exactly how hard she fought in those final seconds before whoever took her succeeded. Mason City Police Chief Jeff Brinkley has said publicly that his department still receives tips year-round and that they've never stopped pursuing them. That's not just a talking point. The searches in Winsted, in 2024 and again in 2025, prove the department is still actively spending resources and manpower on a 30-year-old case. And that's really the through line of this entire story. Most disappearances that go this long without a body, without an arrest, without a confession, they fade. The tip line goes quiet. The file gets moved to a back cabinet. That has never happened here. Not once in 3 decades. Somebody in Mason City, Iowa, or somewhere close to it, has spent 30 years knowing exactly what happened in that parking lot at 4 a.m. on June 27, 1995. And for 30 years, they've said nothing. Jodi Huisentruit didn't get to finish her career. She didn't get to move to that bigger market she'd been working toward. She didn't get to grow old. What she got was 6 unanswered steps across a parking lot, and 30 years of the people who loved her waiting for someone, anyone, to finally tell the truth. If you had to bet on one of the 4 men in this story, which one would it be? And why do you think it's taken 30 years and 2 federal grand juries to still come up empty? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If there's ever another search, another arrest, another break in this case, you're going to want to already be subscribed with the notification bell on, because I will have it here within hours of it breaking. Rest in peace, Jodi. Someone still knows something, and one day they're going to have to say it.